Silent Hill F launched recently and is now in the hands of over 1 million people. With this, Silent Hill F marks a new era for the franchise, as it's the first new Silent Hill story since Silent Hill Downpour, which released over 13 years ago. Set to be developed by Neobards, a Taiwanese-based development team, this would be Konami's biggest gamble by far with their revival of the Silent Hill IP. They had their success with the recent remake of Silent Hill 2 by Bloober Team, which was definitely risky given Bloober Team's prior work. But Silent Hill F broke a lot of series conventions. Its chosen developers Neobards were an interesting choice, a dev team who sure have worked on survival horror games, but never their own, as they merely acted as a support team for other developers. So giving these guys the keys to create a brand new Silent Hill game was a big risk. A smart choice by Konami was to enlist help from Japanese horror visual novel writer Ryokishi07, who's best known for his When They Cry series of visual novels. Ryokishi07 is a man who understands Japanese horror and how to write a deep psychological narrative, which perfectly aligned with the Silent Hill series, but also Silent Hill F specifically, since this game will be set in Japan during the 1960s. With its setting, we would see the series' famous town of Silent Hill go amiss, which led to a lot of questions from longtime fans of the series on how this game would tie into the franchise as a whole, and this led to many discussions on if this game should even be called Silent Hill. And well, after all the uncertainty and mystery behind Silent Hill F, I'm here to answer the question on how did Silent Hill F actually turn out. So without any further delay, let us dive into my review of Silent Hill F. Silent Hill F's story is one that is very similar in design to prior games in the franchise. Shimizu Hinako's story is a very deep one. It features themes of not belonging and wanting to be your own person, and honestly I can relate very much to both of these themes. The story of Silent Hill F is very much a Ryokishi07 story. Not only is it similar to his prior work, but also this game, in my opinion, has pacing very similar to that of a visual novel. For the first few hours of the game, not a lot happens. This game liked to build up its story at a rather slow pace. Silent Hill F in its early hours does show a lot of plot points, but you don't really understand what they mean just yet. I talked about this in my first thoughts and impressions video, but after a few hours of playtime, nothing had really happened. But once the curtain is pulled back on the game's darker themes, Silent Hill F truly shows itself, and hits you over and over again with some insane plot points, and it has moments that will have you wondering what just happened. Silent Hill F's story can be broken down into a few sections. You have Hinako's friend group that consists of Sakuko, Rinko and Shu. Over the course of the game, you will learn more and more about each of our friends and their inner turmoil that surrounds them, and how they specifically play into Hinako's own personal story. Then we have Hinako's family, her mother, father and older sister Junko. From the get-go, we learn that Hinako's home life isn't the best, as the game opens with Hinako leaving her house after an argument with her parents, as she seeks out her friends to talk to, as a means to take her mind off things. The story then follows Hinako as the town around her changes. After the initial death of her friend Sakuko, Hinako, Rinko and Shu plan to escape their village and get help. And for the next few hours of gameplay, that's the main plot. But alternatively, there is a second story unfolding, and this is another section Silent Hill F can be broken down into. Across Silent Hill F, multiple times Hinako will either lose consciousness or fall asleep. This then brings us to the Dark Shrine, which will serve as this game's otherworld area. Here, Hinako meets a man who wears a fox mask over his face, and he is very kind towards Hinako and gentle. The Dark Shrine is very detached, but also interconnected from the current plot, as it follows Hinako making her way through the Dark Shrine, guided by the charming fox mask man. After progressing through the Dark Shrine area enough, Hinako will eventually wake up, and that sets us back onto the main plot of the game. But don't be mistaken, both the village of Ebisagoka and Dark Shrine area's stories intertwine towards the end of the game, so they're not exactly segregated fully. Additionally, as the story of this game is told through cinematics and notes found in the village, Hinako also has a small journal she keeps to herself, which she'll periodically update as the game's events unfold. She writes descriptions on her friends, family and herself, and through this we can learn more about the characteristics of our main cast in a very natural feeling way. In terms of the game's cast, to start we have Hinako herself, the centre of this game. She is a young woman who doesn't belong in this era. Hinako describes herself as someone who is quite stubborn. She hates other people deciding things for her, and has said that more than once she has rebelled and made the wrong decision only to regret it later on, and that she would rather make 100 mistakes on her own than follow someone else's orders. Which leads me to her family life. Hinako's father is an abusive drunk. He lost all the family's wealth with a business venture that went south and is severely in debt. More than once, he has lashed out on Hinako and his wife, hitting or throwing things at them. To pair with her father, Hinako's mother, she doesn't have a good view on. She describes her as pitiful, Her mother, whom bears the brunt of her father's abuse, Hinako views just as bad as her father, since she accepts this life, and more than once has scolded Hinako for talking back to her father and condemning his actions against her mother. Hinako's mother also pushes onto Hinako that the ideal life for a woman is a marriage, stating that a woman's happiness begins with marriage. But despite being told this from a young age, and that being expected of her, Hinako began to question this way of life when she would see how her dad treated her and her mother. In one instance, in a fit of rage, her father threw a knife at Hinako, which narrowly misses her and gets stuck on the floor. All throughout Hinako's house, various things and chips can be found on the walls and floors, all marks of her father's rage. So with her everyday reminders, Hinako grew not only to resent this idea of life, but also her mother and father. And as for her sister Junko, Junko is the ideal daughter. She did what she was told, and went on to marry and become the ideal wife. Hinako used to idolize her sister. She was always there for her when she needed her most, until she left to get married. Junko also pushed on the teachings of their mother onto Hinako. She told her that the quickest way to happiness is to live the way society expects women to, which Hinako dismisses entirely. Moving on from her home life, Hinako's friends are also very important to her, and while at the start of the game they all seem like the best of pals, those relationships quickly unravel the further we get into the game. First, there's Sakuko, who is one of the most tragic tales in the game. She's initially described by Hinako as a little strange. She's deeply spiritual, as she was born to the head priest of the Senisugi Shrine. She takes great pride in donning traditional Miku robes, and participating in local traditions. After finding a key, we can access our house's mailbox, and in it, we find a letter from a hospital, and upon reading it, we can see that Sakuko shows characteristics of mild autism. And remember, this is an era where standing out and being different left you ostracized. Sakuko often felt alone, and would talk to her pets as well as spirits. But when Sakuko met Shimizu Hinako, that all changed, as she felt like she found a true friend. But her biggest fear of all would be ending up alone, and Hinako potentially betraying her. Next up in the friend group is Shu, Hinako's best friend. Shu is the only male of the group, and already there are some conflicts with that. During this period in Japan, boys and girls were separated. It wasn't normal for guys and girls to casually hang out, as typically boys in the Showa era tended to look down on girls. Hinako felt different from most, and Shu was the only person who gave her the time of day. Shu treated Hinako no different to anyone else, regardless of her gender. Whenever Hinako would get into a fight with her parents, Shu was always there for her, and truly understood how she felt. However, to Hinako, Shu and her's relationship was purely platonic, with them even giving each other the nickname partner. Directly related to Shu is the final friend in this group, Rinko. Rinko is an interesting character. Her relationship with Hinako is more tense. She once confessed to her that she had a crush on Shu, and would repeatedly ask if her and Shu were dating. Despite Hinako dismissing this, Rinko didn't believe her, and Hinako and Rinko would also often get into arguments, which stems from Rinko having a fiery, jealous nature. She sees how much attention Shu gives to Hinako, and is jealous as she herself is very feminine and girly, and doesn't understand why Hinako, someone who isn't, is getting a lot of attention from the guy she likes. There also comes a section in the game in which we see that Rinko has been writing rumours about Hinako to ruin her reputation, and her jealousy is a big part of her character. Because of the societal expectations placed onto her, she takes out her frustrations on Hinako, who she views as different and inferior. And lastly in the main cast, we have Foxmask, perhaps the most mysterious piece to this puzzle of a story. His true nature is unknown to Hinako. He never takes off his mask, so that we never see his true identity. He's charming and guides Hinako through the uncertainty that is the Dark Shrine area, even defending her from enemies. Although, we see Hinako start to rely on him as she goes further and further into the Dark Shrine. Foxes are often portrayed as cunning and deceitful, so bear this in mind when looking at Foxmask. Like I mentioned earlier, this game is split into two sections. The overworld, aka the sections that take place in the town of Ebisugoka, and then the otherworld, that takes place in the Dark Shrine. The narrative is both split, but also intertwined. It feels like after a few hours into the game, that we are almost playing as two very different characters, and that's because we are in a way. It's hinted at throughout the whole game that there's two different Shimizu Hinakos, and that is kinda true. The Hinako we play as in the town of Ebisugoka isn't the same one we play as in the Dark Shrine. Overworld Hinako is determined and level-headed, and wants to think for herself. She is also very expressive with emotion, whereas the Dark Shrine Hinako is the opposite. She's cold, distant, and barely expresses any emotion. The Dark Shrine sections also show the true nature of this game's story, as we get some truly out of character moments from Hinako that are jaw-dropping. Once the veil has been lifted on this game's story, there's no putting it back down, as then the Dark Shrine starts to bleed into the main world. While the pacing in this game is initially slow, once the story's true colours are revealed, it feels like the game just never lets up, and keeps on throwing you for a loop, as it never really lets the player catch their breath. and that sentiment is true for the entire back half of this game's story. I'd say for about 60 to 70% through this game's story, every few minutes there would be another twist or moment that had me question what exactly I just witnessed. And I mean, Silent Hill F did an incredible job here in reflecting the aggressive pace of its story onto Hinako. We see her mental state deteriorate towards the end of this game. She starts to lose both her mind and the concept of reality. Hinako really begins to lose touch with herself, as she makes some uncharacteristic choices in the Dark Shrine, which leads to her ending up alone by the end of the game. And it seems like her mind and the village itself is closing in on her. Towards the conclusion, both the story and gameplay grow more aggressive. That feeling is projected onto the player as well. At times, it feels like the game is outright assaulting your psyche. This back half of the game's story is really pushing against the boundaries of its age range as well, with a lot of disturbing imagery. And as Hinako begins to lose control, so do you. The game's story really goes from 0 to 100 really fast, and I anyway found it very hard to keep myself on track, as I would desperately try to process what just happened. And then the game would throw another twist at me, like here is Hinako talking to Hinako. And how the game spins out of control in its final few hours felt very Silent Hill-like, as in prior games, those last few hours had this fever dream feel to them that this game also shares. And after this game ended, I reacted the exact same way I did after beating the classic games. I simply sat during the game's credits and collected my thoughts. Silent Hill F has a much deeper message and themes throughout that you probably won't understand fully as you just play through it. But with some reflection on the game after playing it, it felt like I was experiencing something like Silent Hill 2 over again, for example. And I mean this by the way I found myself reflecting on small details, like what certain creatures and notes really meant. It gave me the same vibes as unraveling Silent Hill 2's story for the first time. And for that, Silent Hill F gets some high praise from me. There was a good bit of this game's story that I didn't mention here, as this is a review, not a story analysis. But to end this section, Silent Hill F has a great story that's layered and covers many themes that players worldwide can relate to in some way, all while entertaining the idea of certain taboos, as well as having its darker themes then manifest through this game's horrifying creatures you must face. And that sounds like a classic Silent Hill game to me. Now, while the story is the meat and potatoes of the game, for any good Silent Hill game, we need a thematic location to experience the game's story in. And the village of Ebisugoka is the perfect location. The town itself is absolutely gorgeous. The lighting and environments are stunning. Its art direction is some of the series' best. It's also a really immersive location. This village, despite being mostly empty during the game's story, feels very lived in. The layout of the village is also very unique compared to the series' past locales. It doesn't just feel like a standard town with a Japanese aesthetic slapped onto it. Its traditional Japanese buildings, rice fields, shrines, and tight alleyways really tie together the game's story and environments. And hey, it feels so real, because it is. The developers Neobards based the village of Ebisugoka on a real-life location, the village of Keniyama in Japan. And it's so cool to see Neobards go the extra mile for this game, and in my opinion, it was completely worth it to give this game that authentic feel they were clearly striving for. The game's claustrophobic layout also lends its hand in helping the game's horror, and this type of design feels very PlayStation 2-esque. The game often leads Hinako down a tight corridor with a nightmarish abomination waiting for her at the end of it, which leads the player to having to decide between fight or flight. Of course, as any Silent Hill game should be, the town of Ebisugoka is caked in a thick layer of fog, and it feels really natural here. It's not as suffocating as it was in Silent Hill 2 Remake, but that's fine, it's just a bit different. We can still see into the distance, but not too far. Much like Silent Hill 2 Remake, Silent Hill F also runs incredibly well on PS5, and on performance mode, it rocks a solid consistent 60 FPS, while still looking great graphically, although there is some issues I'll address later on with performance. I also really liked how every location tied back into the main town as this kind of central hub area. Throughout the game's story, we will branch out and go to locations outside of the main village, Rinko's house, Ebisugoka Middle School, Shu's house, and etc. And we always end up going back to the main town. It gives players familiarity with the main village, but without unnecessarily keeping us trapped here. The town of Ebisugoka is also pretty open in how you explore it for a Silent Hill game. There is a fair amount of secrets and items that players can discover just by going off the beaten path, and I enjoyed this approach to the exploration. It actually really helped me get more immersed into the town. However, to break up the pace of the story, as we explore Ebisugoka, as I mentioned earlier, there is an entirely different set of environments we will explore, that being the Dark Shrine area. The Dark Shrine is a dreamlike version of a Japanese shrine. You can come across a lot of sacred structures, but it all feels off. The Dark Shrine is shrouded in a level of darkness. See what I did there? While the location is more so used to tell a specific part of the plot and also give players key info on other cast members, it also serves as a complete opposite to the environmental and art design seen in the overworld. Gone is the fog, townhouses, rice fields and recognisable structures like a school, and instead we get statues, paintings and a shrine area that are all oppressive and intimidating, but also gorgeous. It's very like the game's tagline says, finding the beauty in terror. All of this environmental design was then tied together by some incredible sound design and music. I mean, it's gotta be said that Akira Yamaoka is an absolute master of music. While he only assisted this game's soundtrack, doing the music for the Fog World, or the Overworld if you will, but still his touch here is needed. And man, even still 26 years on from his first work on the franchise, he is still able to bring his classic Silent Hill style to the table, while also offering a new Silent Hill F experience. Some of the tracks on the soundtrack featured little guitar riffs, which harbour back to some of Akira Yamaoka's best work prior. A Silent Hill game isn't a Silent Hill game without Akira Yamaoka involved, and I stand by that. The other music not done by Yamaoka is also incredible, and the sound design overall is great. Enemies sound intrusive and disturbing. A lot of the creatures have sounds that seem otherworldly, and sound effects that I can't really relate to any known creature, and it makes the threats you encounter feel even more intimidating. Even in combat then, the sound design is great. Attacks sound crunchy and heavy. Hearing Hinako let out a roar as she swings down a heavy pipe attack that then connects with this satisfying metal on flesh sound effect is awesome. There is even a greater level of sound design in the little ambient noises, how Hinako walks, how the old wooden floors creak beneath her, the sounds of Hinako breathing, etc, etc. When playing any horror game, players more often than not will be more alert. All their senses are fully paying attention, and that makes the little sounds like this all the more important and immersive. And since you're paying extra attention to everything, the developers knew this, so they implemented moments where the sound design is the scare. A loud crash or bang pierces the quiet ambience, and it's really effective at scaring players, or at least to scare the shit out of me. But it's not always the loud noises that scare players. Often, as any great sound designer would know, some of the most effective ambience is silence, and Silent Hill F uses this to a great effect to have players constantly on edge. As the fog in the distance breaks, there is always potential that a new threat will emerge, and the silence only adds to the suspense. The environments in Silent Hill F aren't just pretty backdrops behind the plot, it can also be very much a key part of the narrative. As we explore Hinako's childhood town, we find many notes related to the town, its people, and even Hinako's friends. We then explore locations such as Hinako's old middle school and even a twisted version of her home, making it so when a story isn't actively being told to you through dialogue, you're still soaking it in through the atmosphere and locations. I want to also mention how the village of Ebisugoka isn't a static location. And what do I mean by that? Well, throughout the game, the red spider lily growth that occurs at the start of the story takes a real grasp on the village. Progressively through the game, the village will get more and more corrupted, and paths will get blocked off. Hinako's village and world gets smaller and smaller, areas become more aggressive and so on, and this ties in with what Hinako is experiencing in the narrative. These changes the village experience directly ties in the game's themes of change. This deep level of interconnectivity between the story and environmental design reminds me of that of Lakeview Hotel in Silent Hill 2. In that game, as James learns the truth in his story, the world around him changes. Again, I only draw parallels to Silent Hill 2 since in my opinion, it's the best in the franchise, and it's clearly inspired the story here in some way. Finally, I'll end this section with this. The art direction of Silent Hill F is the best or some of the best the series has ever seen. There are so many contrasting locations, colours and environments, but they all work and fit together and don't feel out of place at all. And many a times I had to stop what I was doing and just look at the gorgeous environments the developers had built around me. This village is truly a joy to explore and get lost in, and it feels very much like a Silent Hill location. Well, as much as a Silent Hill location can feel without being set in the town. Now quickly speaking on the game's atmosphere, that is also shown through the game's UI, which is something people often don't think about. The game's map, inventory screen and Hinako's journal all feel so in-universe and tie in the experience of the game when you're not actively playing it. All of Hinako's drawings in her journal and the hand-drawn map of Ebisugoka do wonders for the game's identity and to immerse the player further. Now that I've discussed the story of the game and the locations, vibes, atmosphere and environments, what's the gameplay like? The moment-to-moment gameplay that will be our catalyst into experiencing this world and story, well, it's a mixed bag. Silent Hill F's combat is rather divisive, but why is that? Well, to start, the game features only melee weapons. They focused on crafting a more in-depth melee combat system than the franchise has ever seen before, but in doing that, they had to forgo any firearms being implemented, and I'm fine with that. It makes sense for the period the game's in. Guns were pretty scarce in Japan, so I'm alright with that. There is many layers to this game's melee combat. Firstly, Hinako's weapons can break, Keep smashing your enemies over the head with your metal pipe, and eventually it's going to deform and subsequently break. Although, this can be stalled with the use of a weapon repair kit. Hinako has two main types of attacks, a quick light attack and a longer to execute but more powerful heavy attack. Additionally, Hinako can also counter-attack enemies. During specific frames, players will see a visual prompt, and upon pressing the attack button, Hinako will lunge forward, unleashing a devastating attack, knocking enemies down. This is a key part of the game's combat, and I suggest you master it. Hinako can find a large variety of weapons throughout the whole game, and there seems to be 3 different base categories for weapons, which affects how they are utilised. Firstly, we have the likes of the pipe, baseball bat and crowbar. This would be your medium category, not too slow to swing or too fast, and can pack a pretty decent punch. Then you have your light weapons, those being your kitchen knives and sickles. These are very quick to use, but their heavy attack doesn't leave much of an impact at all. And on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, you have the heavy weapons, such as the sledgehammer and the axe. These monsters are very hard to use, as Hinako struggles to even move while holding them. But if you can give Hinako enough time to unleash a heavy attack with this, the outcome results in devastating amounts of damage. But with a long wind up and recovery time, this should be used wisely. Hinako then has 3 meter bars that players must watch carefully. Of course there's the health bar, pretty self-explanatory. Get hit, lose health, lose too much health, you die. Then we have the stamina meter, which is a point of contention for many players, as most people don't like having to manage their stamina between attacking, running and the dodge mechanic. And I felt it too sometimes. I understand that stamina management can add tension to the game, but sometimes you would get put into situations in which you genuinely couldn't do anything. And finally, there is the sanity meter. This is a bar that can be used by Hinako to charge up more powerful attacks or increase the timing in order to easily execute counterattacks. However, this bar can be depleted by creatures doing things that scare Hinako. Let this bar drop to 0 and Hinako out of fear might get scared and not be able to attack for a while. This meter typically drops when getting grabbed by an enemy or getting hit. However, all 3 of these meters can be affected by many items found throughout the game. We can find a large variety of consumable items that offer various effects. Some heal Hinako's health a small bit, some a large amount, and other items will give her buffs to her stamina or sanity meter. Knowing when to effectively use each of these items is another layer this game's gameplay holds. Sometimes it's not best in a fight to use your biggest and best health items, for example. Sometimes a quick red capsule can give you just enough health to win the fight without leaving you open for long. Then there is an additional layer to this game's progression, and that's the Omomoris. These little charms can give you a wide variety of buffs and changes in combat. You can find these little trinkets around the town of Ebisugoke, or by using the in-game currency known as Fate to purchase a random one while saving your game. These Omomoris offer simple buffs like more health or stamina, but also can offer very specific stuff like making weapons last longer if you use light attacks. You can initially equip one of these, but down the line you can upgrade your capacity. This allows players to fill out a build of Omomoris that suit them best, but it's not as deep as other game builds might have you believe. Don't get me wrong. Going back to the Fate currency, this can be used for a few things. You obtain Fate by giving up items as offerings to the fox deities the town worships, so you often have to decide whether it's worth keeping a consumable for later use in a fight, or if it's best to gain some Fate for a potentially life-saving upgrade. As I mentioned, you can offer up some Fate to get a random Omomori, but you are also able to cleanse yourself with a small amount of Fate to regain your sanity meter. Or with the addition of the Ima item, which is found throughout the town, we can use a large amount of Fate and 1 Ima to upgrade Hinako's health, stamina, sanity, or her Omomori capacity. So deciding what you need to upgrade is part of this game's progression system. And overall, as I've just described to you, the game's progression system is very abnormal for the series. Typically, characters would just get increasingly strong weapons as the game would go on, but here, it's more so onto the player to choose how they want Hinako to strengthen, which I appreciate the different direction. Looking at the combat is fine and well, but it's pointless unless we have some fucked up nightmarish monsters for us to take on. And Silent Hill F has no shortage of grotesque creatures for us to fight. The creature designs in Silent Hill F are absolutely gorgeous and horrifying. They're horrifying in design, but still look very humanoid, or they're at least derivative of human anatomy. This is the design philosophy Masahiro Ito, series monster designer, first implemented back with the original Silent Hill games. And despite him not working on this game, I believe that the game's chosen creature designer, Kira, did an incredible job of replicating his design philosophy. The designs of the monsters we face seem to be echoes from Hinako's life. The Ayakakashi monster we fight seems to be a reference to the teenagers of the village and Hinako's peers, or the Oyomori, which is an amalgamation of dolls, seemingly referencing childhood innocence in its design. These two examples of real life things, such as classmates in schools or children's dolls, I love how they turned them into nightmarish creatures for us to face, which then works incredible here to tie in the combat sections into the story. Now the moment-to-moment gameplay, which sees us face enemies, is a mixed bag. All enemies have a few different attacks with different counter windows, and they also have the ability to grab Hinako, which deals devastating damage, and sanity meter drain, so make sure you avoid that. There is also this hit stop effect that plays whenever the enemies are struck by Hinako, which was pointed out by many before the game's launched as looking janky and bad. Getting it in my hands though, and it's not the worst. Combat most of the time is slower and more methodical. Often you'll find yourself waiting around to wait and see what enemies will do. So the hit stop effect then playing after you land one big strike is okay in my opinion. Where it does get annoying though is when you face multiple enemies at once, which yeah, that's where the combat flaws are shown more. And as a side note, absolutely fuck this creature, okay? The Kamugara is the biggest pain in the ass ever. I think seriously if this creature was removed from the game, my enjoyment would have been a lot higher. Anyways, a constant theme throughout this review, as you may have noticed, is how the game splits into two, with the Fog World and the Dark Shrine. The story is split, so is the environment and music. That also then applies here to the combat, as there is many differences with the combat and the Dark Shrine. To start, Hinako gets access to only two weapons here. First you get the Kaiken, a small defense dagger, and then you get the Naginata, a heavier pole weapon. Unlike in the Fog World though, your weapons in the Dark Shrine can't break at all. Although, in a bizarre design choice, unless specific requirements are met, which you get access to a good bit into the game, enemies will respawn indefinitely after you kill them, meaning fighting enemies only gets you some breathing room for a small time period. You can properly kill enemies, but you must be near a blue lantern, which leads to this frustrating dance of getting an enemy's attention, running to a nearby lantern, then killing them. And this song and dance isn't always viable either, and neither is even fighting enemies at all. In some sections, you are forced to just run by enemies, as engaging all of them, on hard mode anyways, would be suicide. And the biggest difference between the Fog World and the Dark Shrine is the Fox Arm. Now, this greatly ties in the game's themes of change and identity, and the overall plot point of Hinako wanting to decide things for herself. After experiencing probably the series' most uncomfortable moments of gore, Hinako can attack enemies with his Fox Arm, and it's actually really fun to play with. It fixes a lot of what's wrong with the Dark Shrine, and it allows Hinako to more easily fight groups of enemies. And like I said, it's tied to the story, although I'd say some fans will be turned off by just how out there this is. Especially Hinako's Beast Mode, which allows you for a short duration to become invincible and superpowered. Yeah, long-time fans will have a hard time accepting that one. I should also now mention the bosses of Silent Hill F, and there is some amazing design creatures here. Both Sakuko and Rinko's boss fights are really well designed, and on a deeper level, their attacks and designs are related to who they are as a character, which I only learned after some reflection once I beat the game. There is a nice level of spectacle to these boss fights as well, with Rinko's boss fight sticking out in particular as a visually gorgeous fight, as it says lava and fire effects pollute the screen during the epic showdown. In its design, the combat is rather clunky, and some of that I reckon is by design, as we do play as a teenage girl. She's not going to be a seasoned combat veteran, and in the early hours of this game, this slower clunky combat style works really well, and I was having a lot of fun fighting enemies or running by them when supplies were low. Where this absolutely does not work is in late game sections of the game. In late game sections, not only do we face multiple enemies at once, but more often than not, we are forced into unskippable combat encounters in order to progress, which is so anti-Silent Hill in its design, it's crazy. When it's literally a known series mechanic to often run by enemies when you are outmatched, but here it's baffling to see that omitted at the end of the game. I think in general, this is where most people's complaints with the combat come from. Those last 2 to 3 hours of the game are just not fun, and I found myself getting pretty frustrated. Not only do we face multiple foes at once that's required to progress, but among those enemies is this weird TE monster that spawns enemies if you don't kill it quick, but you can't kill it quick since there's loads of enemies around, and do you see what I mean? I feel like Neobards simply tried to do way too much with what they had here. Even in the Dark Shrine, we can see some design flaws, and it's only really helped by the addition of the Fox Arm, and even then it's still not amazing. Aside from the combat, there is another core layer to the Silent Hill cake, and that's puzzles. Every Silent Hill game needs good puzzles, and that is true here with Silent Hill F. There is a nice variety in what you'll be doing to solve these puzzles. They also really greatly fit the game's themes and aesthetics well. It felt very satisfying to solve these puzzles and progress, although some were kind of vague in their instructions, either that or I'm just stupid. But I found the puzzles enjoyable and well placed in the game. My favourite example is the puzzles within Ebisagoka Middle School. You have the locker code puzzle, along with the box puzzle. The puzzle box comes with multiple riddles which you unlock as you open each layer, and the locker codes can be deciphered by finding notes around the school. And reading these notes really tells the story of how teenagers get on amongst each other. Rumours being spread, crushes developing, it's all so authentic, and that being related to the puzzle we solve makes these specific puzzles fit right in. Although if I were to complain, there is some repetition with a few puzzles. Two puzzles in particular follow the same format of having to find 3 crests and then place them in, which kinda bugged me, especially the example that appears late into the game. Now, what are my complaints and criticisms with Silent Hill F as a whole, as I've been rather positive this whole review? Well, to get straight into it, the combat, like I said, is good, but the second half of the game is kinda baffling to say the least. After the slow, gradual pace of the game's opening hours, we eventually are forced into constant enemy encounters, and in one of the most anti-Silent Hill design choices ever, we have to fight large groups of enemies just to progress, which just goes against everything that a Silent Hill game is. We are forced to fight boss enemies in small intervals, and it gets kinda ridiculous after a while, especially when the story's pace kicks into 100, and you're just dying to know what happens next. This is then stunted by the game's gameplay. I want to also mention the game's pacing overall, as it felt like the last 2.5 hours of the game were kinda stretched. But let me be clear here, there was a lot of important environments and story moments in that time, and they didn't feel overbearing at all, but my god did the gameplay. Getting rid of half the encounters and removing the forced combat moments would greatly fix this game's back half, and it feels like such a misstep for a game that's first few hours are kinda flawless. Also in a very non-Silent Hill design is the game's locations we explore. Let me explain. Typically, Silent Hill games have you explore main locations throughout the game that are broken up by small parts of exploration. Think of the apartments in Silent Hill 2 or the hospital, even the subway in Silent Hill 3, etc, etc. Silent Hill F only really features 2 main locations, Ebisugoka and Ebisugoka Middle School, and even then that's not really the same. It didn't have the same Silent Hill flow prior games had. While Ebisugoka Middle School gave me the vibes and felt very similar to exploring those core locations, you don't stay here too long, and that's disappointing because it was a great location while we were there. And while I didn't mind its different style, it's very clear that it's missing that Silent Hill flow. Enemy variety I also find to be a bit of a complaint, but that's simply because of how many combat encounters we get put into. It's no wonder I began to get sick and tired of every enemy, because you have to fight so many. If anything, this game has more enemy types than other games in the franchise, but it feels so repetitive here since you're forced to face so many of them. While I mentioned earlier this game rocks a solid 60 FPS, there was some performance issues. I have no idea what caused this. At certain parts of the game, my FPS absolutely tanked and the game would drop to what felt like below 30 FPS. And this weird bug would persist for a little while, but exiting and quitting the game seemed to help alleviate this. But still, it's something to be aware of on consoles at least. This is no complaint or issue, but please for the love of God, play Silent Hill F with Japanese audio. Trust me, this is the only way to experience this game's story. As someone who typically experiences Japanese media through English dubs, this game's English dub is just not it, and I kinda cringe every time I hear it. And I mean absolutely no disrespect towards any of the game's voice actors, as they're all incredibly talented. It's just that the Japanese feels so authentic and well acted, so that the English seems so misplaced in comparison. Oh, and finally, fuck these guys. To conclude, Silent Hill F is a fantastic game. It truly feels like a new compelling entry in the franchise. With an incredible story, well-written characters, gorgeous environments and art direction, Silent Hill atmosphere and vibes unique to this game that also managed to pay homage to the series as a whole. Its combat is also good, but, and that's a big but it suffers from some odd design choices, pacing issues, and an overall miss of an endgame section gameplay wise. The game's also a 50-50 from me on its Silent Hill style designs. Its narrative is seamlessly integrated into the environments and enemies, but a lack of main location structure and shocking combat encounters has me scratching my head on how it can be so Silent Hill and so not Silent Hill at the same time. Shimizu Hinako's story is a beautiful tale, and some of the themes explored in this game even I can relate to in my own way. This game has some beautiful and shocking moments, and its narrative is as mind-bending as the series' bests. And if you are thinking about playing Silent Hill F, I absolutely urge you to do so. Buy it now, wait for a sale, or hell, watch a walkthrough at the minimum. Please experience this game's story. Its narrative is one of my favourites in the franchise, and I suspect the community as a whole will be talking about Silent Hill F for many years to come. Silent Hill F gets an 8.5 out of 10 from me. All the good the game does is kinda stumped by its massive gameplay issues, but for the most part, the game is excellent, and gameplay isn't bad throughout. Now, of course this is just my opinion. Some of you may disagree with me, and that's fine, because it seems this game is pretty divisive. But I'm confident that it's going to settle into the franchise at a good spot overall. Becoming engrossed in Hinako's world and learning more about her story is one of my favourite video game narratives I've experienced in years, and I'm going to be replaying this game over and over again to obtain all its endings. And while this is now the end of my review for Silent Hill F, this isn't the end for my coverage of the game, far from it, since I have a bucket load of more Silent Hill F videos planned for you all, so I hope you will look forward to all of those. I want to thank you yourself for watching this entire video, and I want to hear from you. What do you think of Silent Hill F? Let me know down below. And with that, I'll conclude my video, and I'll hopefully see you on my next one. Peace.